quadratic equations. Okay, we are familiar with factoring, of course. And then we were doing the ones where we were taking the square roots of both sides. So we were doing that bit as well. So this is something that's called completing the square. Usually everybody's least favorite version of this is completing the square. It's not really hard, but for some reason people don't like it. Okay. So let's get into this. And like I said, just the best way is just hop in and start talking about what's going on here. Okay. So this says, find the value of C that makes each expression a perfect square trinomial. So what they mean by that is you're going to have some version, get my pen right here, that would be good. All right. So you have some version of X plus or minus some number, we'll just say plus some, so something like this, and then square. So it's the same thing repeated twice. Okay. So what they're saying is when we get this format here, we'd like to end up with something that looks like that as well. Okay. So that's where this is going. So to get this started, it follows a pretty simple procedure. Okay. So what we do is we always take the number in front of the X, this guy right here. Okay. We're going to take him at, doesn't matter what the number is, we take him, so we take the 16, we divide him by 2. Okay, so 16 divided by 2 is 8. Then we take that answer and square it, or take it times itself. So 8 times 8 is 64. So in this case, the number we want here is 64. Okay, now how does that end up looking like what we're doing here? Okay, so here's the useful hack on this one. So you're gonna have an X here. We've got all pluses, right? So this is gonna be plus. The number that goes here is the number after we divided the middle guy by 2. So it's gonna be 8. So what this is telling us is that x squared plus 16x plus 64 factors into x plus 8 squared. Okay, and if you want, we can check that real quick. Let me bring up another screen just so we know. Let's bring up another screen there. All right, so let's look at that. So if we do x plus 8 squared, we'll do x plus 8 and then times x plus 8. All right. Okay, standard FOIL stuff, right? X times x, x squared. X times 8 is plus 8x. Let's move on to the other guys here. So we've got 8 times x, that's another plus 8x. And then we do 8 times 8 is plus 64. Put these two guys together, right? So 8 and 8 is 16x. And we've got the other guys, so just bring him down. X squared plus 16x plus 64. Which looks suspiciously like what we were talking about on the last page. Okay, so we're going to get into why this is important, but let's walk through a couple of these just to make sure we're good. But it's the same procedure every time, so it makes it kind of easy. All right, so the next guy, it says, well, what number do I put into this to make this a perfect square? So we do the same thing again. We're going to take 22, divide him by 2, that gives us 11. And 11 squared is 121. Use your calculator if you're not sure. Okay, so then x squared plus 22x plus 121 ends up being, I'll just use this up here, x plus 11 squared. Didn't plan that out, but it worked out good, right? So again, the number after you divide by the 2 is the number that goes here. That way you don't have to mess around with all that, well, let me figure out what the factor is of this thing. You already know. All right. So notice the next two, we have a negative sign in the middle. Okay. But that's not going to matter because here's what's going to happen. So we're going to take negative 30 and we're going to divide that by 2. That's going to give us minus 15, right? But when you square the minus 15, negative 15 and negative 15 is going to get positive 225. Okay? And this is just because I've squared 15 way too many times. Okay? So what we're saying here is this C value, this number at the end, is always going to be a positive. Not going to be a negative, ever. Always positive. Okay? Now the only difference is, notice that after we divided by 2, we ended up with a negative 15, correct? So that means when we write this up, this is going to be x minus 15 squared. And then when you square that out, you'll get this guy back. So you get p squared. Well, they're using p. I'm using x because I'm used to x. Okay. So if this was p minus 15 squared, you'd end up getting p squared minus 30p plus 225. Okay. Questions so far? So basically what we're doing is we're taking the number in the middle, it's in front of the x or the k or whatever, the single, not the x squared or the k squared or whatever, just the single value, right? We divide him by 2, and then we take that answer and square it. That's what we add for C. And then what we can do is we factor it into the situation we got going on here. Okay? Still good? I know it's Monday, but you guys are awful quiet. Thank you, Chloe. All right. So let's do this last one here. So this last one's a little bit of a pain, gonna be honest, because we do the same thing we've been doing, right? So let's get some different colors going on here just for fun. All right. So this one here, we're still going to divide by the 2. That's 5 halves. Ew. Right? So 5 halves, and when you square it, negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. Right? And 2 times 2 is 4. You can leave it that way if you'd like. If you turn it into a decimal, it's like 6.25. Okay? But again, what we're looking for is once we add that number to the end there, then this thing factors into, unfortunately in this case, it's going to be x, well, k, but I'm using x, minus 5 halves squared. Okay, so even though that's a fraction, that's okay. We can do it that way. All right. Okay, so you're kind of going, well, why are we doing this? Well, this is sort of the first step to completing the square. And like I said, this is another way of solving quadratic equations, and usually we'll do this when a quadratic equation doesn't factor nicely. So you're going to get weird answers. Okay, so that's the whole point of this. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so we've already been kind of doing this. All right, so same thing here. We're going to take this guy here and divide him by 2. So that's 17 over 2. And then we're going to square that. So this one's kind of ugly. Maybe we'll use 17 divided by 2 is 8.5. So what this is going to look like is when we get around to it, this will be, I'll use G this time since they keep insisting, an 8.5 squared. Okay, so the number we have to add on there is 8.5 to the second power, and I'm trying to find my calculator at the moment. Give me a sec. Where has my calculator gone? Bring back my calculator. There he is. All right, so make him a little, whoops, where'd you go? Come back, you. All right, so then we've got 8.5 squared So that's 72.25. So that's the number we're going to add here. This is going to be 72.25. And the fraction is like 289 over 4 or something obnoxious like that. Okay, so that one's a little ugly. Next one, though, not so bad. So same thing, we're going to take the minus 48. We're going to divide him by 2. So that means this is going to end up being x minus 24 squared. Okay? But then the number we add on is going to be negative 24 times negative 24. So again, calculator city. So we say 24 squared is 576. So that's going to be the number we add on here is 576. Okay? And again, you're probably wondering, okay, so what's the point of all this? We're getting there. Slowly but surely. But I mean, this is like an intro day, so you know how it is. We throw a lot of stuff at you at once, and a little bit of it sticks today, but it'll eventually all stick as we go along. All right. So it says solve each equation by completing the square. So here it is. Now this is what's going to happen. So what we're looking for, step 1, they've already taken care of for us. You always want to make sure you've got the variables on one side, usually the left, and the number guys on the other side. Okay, so now here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave ourselves a little space here. We're going to go x squared plus 6x and leave some space equals 144. Okay? So when I leave the space, here's what's going to happen. We're going to do what we said before. We're going to take the 6, right? We're going to divide him by 2. That gives us 3. We're going to square the 3, and that gives us 9. So we're going to add 9 here. Now, you know how it is with algebra. If I add 9 to the left side, the right side starts screaming, right? They're like, hey, what about us? We want a 9. Fine, here's your plus 9 as well. Okay? So then what's going to happen here is, remember, the whole purpose of adding this 9 is to turn it into something like this, right? And we already know from our useful little hack that the number after you divide by 2 is the number I need here. So this is going to be x plus 3 squared. And that's going to equal 144 plus 9, that's going to be 153. Okay, so we've done this stuff on the left before, and now we've got this bit on the right where we added the 9 to that side too, and we got 153. So the whole purpose here is we're solving for x. It's pretty much what we're always doing, right? Solving for x. It's kind of the standard operating mode of algebra. All right, so we've got x plus 3 squared equals 153. We don't like e to the x squared, right? And we don't want to multiply it back out because that'll take us back to the previous step. So that's not good. So remember the previous section, we were talking about solving these by taking the square roots. This is the same thing. We just have a little bit different intro to it. But then we eventually end up doing the same kind of stuff. So that means we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now here's the thing to remember. Remember we talked about this. When you take the square root of just a regular number, even if it's 153, there's going to be a plus version and a minus version, right? So this will be plus or minus, try it anyway, plus or minus square root of 153. All right, I don't think 153 reduces, so we're going to clear there. All right, so when we take the square root of this side, we're just going to get x plus 3. And that's going to equal plus or minus the square root of 153. So our last step for solving for x is we just have to get the 3 to the other side. And we do that by subtracting 3, right? So we subtract 3 here, subtract 3 here, so we end up getting x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 153. Believe it or not, that ugly thing's your answer. All right. So the square root of 153, that's going to be like 12 and some change, roughly. And there's two answers here. Remember we said quadratics usually give you two answers. Okay. So the first answer is -3 plus the square root of 153. And then the other one is -3 minus the square root of 53. So typically they'll let you leave it like that. That's fine. But if you want to get a vibe for what the answer actually is, then that's a calculator thing. So then what we do here is we'd say, all right, we'll go this here. So we say 153, square root it. So as I said, 12 and some change, so about 12.37, right? Then we subtract 3. So the one answer is about 9.37. And the other answer is going to be negative. So we can do 153, and then we take the square root, and that's going to be negative, and then we have to subtract off another 3. So your other answer is minus 15.37, and the other answer was plus 9.37. So again, the whole purpose of this stuff, as we get more and more into this, is when you're talking about the graphs of these things, this is going to be where this particular graph, and remember that our parabolas are U-shaped, our x-squared graphs are U-shaped, right? So this is going to tell us where this thing is crossing the x-axis, and it usually crosses at two different places. Okay? So that's what we got going on here. All right, so again, a lot of stuff, I know. Questions? All right, let's try the other one. So again, if they don't have it set up this way, you need to make sure you have variables on one side and number guys on the other side. Okay? All right, so we're going to do the same thing we were doing before. Let's find some color here. All right, so we take the minus 4, divide him by 2, and that gives us -2. Then we take -2, square it, we get positive 4. So what we've got here, this is going to be x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 30 plus 4. Okay? So we remember that this is going to factor into something that is a perfect square. And the number we use is this guy right after we divide. So this will be x minus 2 squared equals, we got 30 plus 4 is 34. Okay? So then we go ahead and do our square root thing, right? So let's do our square root thing here. So we do the square root of this, square root of that. Remember, this is going to be plus or minus. So then this is just going to give us x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 34. Okay? And then all we have to do is move the 2 to the other side by adding 2. So we add 2 here, we add 2 here. So then x is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 34. Square root of 34 is a little less than 6. Okay. Oh, they just gave us the 30. That was just, they said this stuff equals 30. So yeah, they just gave us that. Yeah, we didn't come up with that ourselves. Cool? All right. So the point of the story is obviously if you tried to factor these guys, it wouldn't go very well. Okay? So completing the square, and then down the road when we talk about the dreaded quadratic formula, and we will, these particular procedures are for quadratic equations that don't play nice. These are for ones where they don't factor very nice and things like that. So these are the problem children, quote unquote. So when they don't factor, we have to resort to either completing the square or, once we learn how to do it, the quadratic formula. All right. All right, let's maybe try one more and then we'll call it. All right. So same deal. So again, we take the 16, divide him by 2, and we get 8. Then we square the 8, and that's 64. So we're going to add 64 here and 64 here. So we've got m squared plus 16m plus 64 equals, so we've got 64 minus 59, that's going to be 5, right? So again, remember our useful hack on this one is this is going to be x plus or minus something squared, and that number is always the number right after we divide by 2. So we make this x plus 8 squared. This will give us this, and I know I'm using x's again because I'm used to it. All right, then we got our 5, right? All right, so once we get it in that format where we got something squared on one side, and then we've got a number on the other side, we take the square root here, but remember this is going to be plus or minus if I left enough room to do that. Okay, so this is going to be x plus 8, you just get the stuff around the square root, equals plus or minus square root of 5. And then the only thing we have to do is move the 8 over by subtracting it. Cool. So x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 5. And remember, that's two separate answers. They just write it all together because math guys are lazy like that. Okay? So that would be minus 8 plus the square root of 5, and then minus 8 minus the square root of 5. And again, the square root of 5 is going to be 2 and some change, because 2 times 2 is 4, but this is a little bigger. All right. Questions? Not so far? Okay. Well, we'll continue this on next time. But once again, I appreciate you guys hanging in there today, because and I don't live that far away, but you know, when you've got 2 accidents, like one, I mean, literally one and then another one right away, it's just like, ugh. Didn't think I was ever going to get there. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and wrap it up for today. We will continue this stuff on tomorrow, and once again, appreciate you stopping by.